Arizona Territory, 1875. Vaughn Gray stood at the edge of the painted desert, watching the setting sun cast long shadows across the crimson landscape. At 26, he'd already spent 8 years riding the lonesome trails of the frontier, and the harsh beauty before him matched the barren terrain of his heart. His lean frame cast a long shadow as he removed his worn Stetson, revealing sandy blonde hair that caught the dying light. "No point in settling," he muttered to his horse, a dappled gray mare who'd been his only steady companion these past years. "The frontier takes everything eventually. Better to stay moving, stay ahead of trouble." He'd seen it happen too many times. Men who put down roots only to have them torn away by drought, disease, or the lawlessness that still plagued the territories. Better to keep riding, keep working seasonal jobs on ranches across the Southwest, answerable to no one. Loneliness was safer than loss. Vaughn replaced his hat and guided his mare toward the distant lights of Cottonwood Springs, a growing settlement nestled where the desert met reliable water. He needed supplies and maybe a night in a real bed before moving on to the Rocking W Ranch, where he'd signed on for the spring cattle drive. His worn leather vest and faded blue shirt bore the dust of 3 days hard riding. A light stubble shadowed his sun-bronzed face, and his green eyes, which many had told him were his best feature, remained wary, scanning the horizon from habit. "Just passing through," he reminded himself. "Always just passing through." The Cottonwood Springs saloon buzzed with the usual Friday evening crowd when Vaughn pushed through the swinging doors. Cowboys from neighboring ranches, miners from the hills, and town businessmen mingled in a haze of tobacco smoke and piano music. He ordered whiskey and found a corner table, his back to the wall, another habit from years on the move. That's when he saw her. She stood behind the bar, passing drinks to the barkeep with efficient grace. 20 years old, with honey blonde hair pulled back in a practical arrangement that couldn't quite contain the wayward curls framing her face. Her blue calico dress was simple but neat, with a white apron tied at her slim waist. But it was her laugh that caught his attention, genuine and warm, rising above the din of the saloon like birdsong in the desert. "Who's that?" Vaughn asked the grizzled prospector at the next table, nodding toward the bar. "That there's Nora Valenti. Owns this place since her daddy passed last winter. Tough as nails, that girl, running this establishment on her own. Turned down 3 marriage proposals already, from what I hear." Vaughn nodded, taking another sip of whiskey. Smart woman, he thought. Marriage was just another way to invite heartache. Just then, a commotion erupted at the bar. A red-faced miner, clearly deep in his cups, had grabbed Nora's wrist as she collected empty glasses. "How about a dance, pretty lady?" The man slurred, yanking her toward him. "Please release my arm," Nora said firmly, her voice steady despite the danger in her eyes. "You've had enough for tonight, Mr. Fowler." "Don't tell me when I've had enough," the miner growled, tightening his grip. Before Vaughn realized what he was doing, he'd crossed the room. "The lady asked you to let go," he said quietly, standing beside the pair. The miner squinted up at him. "Mind your business, cowboy. Release her arm, and we can all return to our evening," Vaughn said, his voice still calm though his hand hovered near the revolver at his hip. Something in Vaughn's steady gaze must have penetrated the miner's alcohol-fogged brain. He dropped Nora's wrist with a muttered curse and staggered away. "Thank you," Nora said, rubbing her wrist, "though I could have handled it. I keep a shotgun behind the bar." Vaughn tipped his hat. "No doubt you could, ma'am." Her blue eyes studied him with surprising intensity. "You're new in town." "Passing through." "Yes, ma'am. Always am." A slight smile curved her lips. "Well, Mr. Gray." Vaughn Gray. "Well, Mr. Gray, your next drink is on the house." Before Vaughn could protest, the saloon doors burst open, and the town sheriff entered, face grim. "Nora," the lawman called. "That gang that hit Silver Creek last week, they've been spotted heading this way. Might want to close up early tonight." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Vaughn had heard of the outlaws, 3 brothers who'd left a trail of robbery and bloodshed across the territory. Nora straightened her shoulders. "Thank you, Sheriff. I'll take your advice." She turned to the room. "Gentlemen, due to circumstances, we'll be closing in 30 minutes. As patrons finished their drinks and filed out, Vaughn lingered, watching Nora directing her staff with calm efficiency. "You have somewhere safe to go?" he found himself asking as she passed his table. She paused. "I live above the saloon. It's secure enough." Begging your pardon, but if those men come looking for cash, this will be their first stop. Nora's composure slipped, just for a moment. I can't leave. Everything I have is here. Vaughn hesitated. Getting involved wasn't his way. He'd be gone tomorrow regardless. But something in her determined stance stirred something long dormant. I'll stay, he heard himself say. Keep watch tonight. Surprise flashed across her face. You don't even know me, Mr. Gray. No, ma'am. But I know trouble when I see it coming. That night, after the saloon closed, Vaughn sat in a chair by the front door, his rifle across his lap. Nora had protested at first, but finally accepted his offer, bringing him coffee and taking a seat nearby instead of retiring to her rooms upstairs. So tell me about yourself, Mr. Gray, she said, those blue eyes studying him again. What brings a lonesome cowboy like yourself through our little town? Signed on for spring roundup at the Rocking W, he answered, sipping the strong coffee. I move with the seasons. Winter in Arizona, summer in Colorado. Wherever there's work. No home to go back to, she asked, then added quickly. Forgive me if that's too personal. Vaughn stared into his cup. Had one once. Farm in Kansas. Lost it all in '67. Drought. Then grasshoppers. Pa died that winter. Ma the next spring. I'm sorry, she said softly. He shrugged. Life on the frontier. It takes more than it gives. Is that what you truly believe? Her question hung in the air between them. Before he could answer, they heard horses outside, several of them, approaching fast. Upstairs, Vaughn whispered urgently. Lock yourself in. Nora shook her head, reaching beneath the bar and producing a shotgun. This is my place. I'll defend it. Before Vaughn could argue, the front window shattered as a bottle sailed through, exploding in flames when it hit the floor. Fire, Vaughn shouted, lunging to stomp out the flames while Nora grabbed a blanket to smother them. Through the broken window came a harsh voice. Send out the money, and nobody gets hurt. Let them take it, Vaughn said to Nora as they crouched behind the bar. It's not worth your life. It's everything I have, she replied fiercely. My father built this place. It's all I have left of him. The door splintered as someone kicked it, and Vaughn made a split-second decision. Cover me, he whispered, then rolled away from the bar, firing his rifle toward the doorway. What followed was chaos, gunshots, breaking glass, shouted threats. Nora proved herself a capable shot, keeping the outlaws at bay while Vaughn worked his way around the room. The safe's in the office, one of the men shouted to his companions. Jenkins, get in there. Vaughn saw a shadow moving toward the back room where Nora kept her business records and earnings. He fired, catching the man in the shoulder. A bullet splintered the wood beside Vaughn's head in return. Vaughn, Nora cried, and the genuine fear in her voice for his safety startled him. Then suddenly, new gunfire erupted, but from outside. The sheriff had arrived with a posse. The outlaws, finding themselves caught between two forces, fled into the night. In the aftermath, as the sheriff's men pursued the gang, Vaughn helped Nora clean up the broken glass and overturn furniture. You saved my business, she said quietly as they worked. Why would you risk your life for a stranger? Vaughn paused, broom in hand. I'm not rightly sure, he admitted. It just seemed the right thing to do. She studied him again with those penetrating blue eyes. You're not what you seem, Vaughn Gray. You call yourself a drifter, but I see a man who still cares about more than just survival. Her words unsettled him. By dawn, when the cleanup was finished, Vaughn made his excuses. The Rocking W is expecting me, he said, hat in hand at the door. I should be moving on. Nora nodded, disappointment flickering across her features. Of course. Thank you again, Mr. Gray. As he mounted his mare in the early morning light, Vaughn told himself this was for the best. Getting attached to people, to places, it only led to pain when the time came to leave. And the time always came. Yet as he rode toward the Rocking W, he found himself looking back at Cottonwood Springs more than once. The Rocking W proved to be a sprawling operation, with over 5,000 head of cattle and 24 cowboys preparing for the spring drive to Kansas. Vaughn fell into the routine easily enough. Long days in the saddle, nights around the campfire with men who asked few questions and expected fewer answers. But something had changed. As he rode the range, his thoughts kept drifting back to Cottonwood Springs, to a saloon with a broken window, and to blue eyes that seemed to see through his carefully constructed walls. 3 weeks into his stay, he rode into town with several cowboys for supplies and their monthly night of relaxation. He told himself he wasn't looking forward to seeing the Cottonwood Saloon again, or its proprietress. The lie became apparent when his heart sank upon entering the establishment to find Nora nowhere in sight. A different woman tended bar, and the place seemed diminished somehow. "Looking for Miss Valenti?" asked a cowboy who'd noticed Vaughn scanning the room. "She's been laid up this past week. Caught a fever that's been going around. Doc's worried about her, living alone above the saloon with no one to tend to her." Vaughn felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Before he could consider the wisdom of his actions, he approached the woman behind the bar. "Pardon me, ma'am. Is there anything Miss Valenti needs? Medicine or assistance?" The woman eyed him suspiciously. "Who's asking?" "Vaughn Gray. I helped her during the robbery attempt last month." Recognition dawned. "Oh, she mentioned you. Said you were a hero, though she figured you were long gone by now." Vaughn shifted uncomfortably. "Just happened to be passing through again. Is she all right?" The woman's expression softened. "Doc says she needs rest and care, but there's no one to look after her. She's too proud to ask for help. Keeps trying to get up and work." That sounded like Nora, Vaughn thought. Would it be improper for me to check on her? An hour later, Vaughn knocked tentatively on the door to Nora's rooms above the saloon, a basket from the general store in hand containing broth, medicine, and fresh bread. "Who is it?" came a weak voice. "Vaughn Gray, Miss Valenti." A pause, then "Mr. Gray?" "Yes, ma'am. I heard you were unwell. I've brought some supplies." The door opened to reveal Nora in a simple wrapper, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face pale, but her eyes bright with surprise. "You came back," she said simply. "Just passing through," he replied automatically, then added more honestly. "And concerned when I heard you were ill." She stepped back, allowing him to enter the small but neatly kept apartment. "I'm much better today," she insisted, though the effort of standing seemed to tax her. "With respect, ma'am, you should be resting." Vaughn set down his basket. "I've brought broth from the hotel restaurant and medicine from the doctor." Nora sank into a chair, her usual composure undermined by weakness. "I can't afford to rest. The saloon is being managed well enough by your staff," Vaughn finished. "You won't help your business by working yourself into a grave." She sighed, relenting. "You're right, of course. Thank you for your kindness." Vaughn found himself staying, heating the broth on her small stove, making sure she took the medicine. They talked as she ate, about her father, an Italian immigrant who'd built the saloon from nothing, about the town's growth since the railroad spur was announced, about books they'd both read in quieter times. "You surprise me, Mr. Gray," Nora said as darkness fell. "A cowboy who quotes Shakespeare." Vaughn smiled slightly. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married. She made sure her son could read more than just cattle brands. And yet you choose the solitary life of a drifter." It wasn't a question, but Vaughn answered anyway. "It's safer that way." "Safer than what?" "Than caring about people or places that can be taken away." Nora's gaze held his. "That sounds like a lonely philosophy." "Better lonely than broken," he replied quietly. "Is it?" she challenged. "Is it truly better to feel nothing than to risk feeling loss?" Before he could answer, a coughing fit overtook her. Vaughn helped her to bed, uncomfortable with the intimacy but unwilling to leave her struggling. "I should go," he said when she was settled. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked, her voice small in a way he hadn't heard before. He hesitated only briefly. "Yes." For the next week, Vaughn rode into town each evening after his work at the ranch. He brought supplies, read to Nora when her eyes were too tired, and gradually told her more about himself than he'd shared with anyone in years, about the Kansas farm, about the family buried there, about the string of jobs in town since then. In return, she told him of her own losses, her mother when she was 12, her father just last year, and the struggle to maintain the business alone when many thought a woman couldn't or shouldn't. "They call me stubborn," she said one evening as they sat by her window, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of fire. "Maybe I am. But this place is mine. I won't give it up just because it's difficult." "Stubborn isn't always bad," Vaughn replied. "Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps you going." Her recovery progressed, and with it, a growing unease in Vaughn's heart. Their time together had created something he hadn't expected, a connection that threatened the detachment he'd cultivated for years. The night before he was due to leave with the cattle drive, he came to say goodbye. Nora had fully recovered, her blue eyes bright again, her honey-blonde hair neatly arranged. "So," she said as they stood awkwardly in her sitting room, "tomorrow you become a drifter again." "That's who I am," he replied, though the words felt hollow now. "Is it?" Nora stepped closer. "These past weeks, I've seen a different man. One who cares deeply, who reads poetry, who stays when it would be easier to go." "Temporary madness," Vaughn said with a forced smile. "The cattle drive will cure me." "Will it?" Her eyes held his. "Or will you find yourself looking back, wondering what might have been if you'd stayed in one place long enough to find out?" Vaughn felt a tightness in his chest. "Nora, I'm not. I don't know how to." He stopped, frustrated by his inability to articulate the fear that gripped him. "I know," she said softly. "You're afraid. So am I. Life offers no guarantees, Vaughn. Not on the trail, not in town. The only certainty is this moment, right now." And then she was in his arms, her lips on his, and Vaughn felt something inside him crack open, a dam breaking after years of careful construction. When they parted, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I have to go tomorrow," he whispered. "I gave my word." "I know," she replied. "But will you come back?" He wanted to promise, but fear held his tongue. "I don't know," he answered honestly. Her smile was sad but understanding. "Then I will hope, but not expect. That's the best I can offer a lonesome cowboy who's still running from ghosts." The cattle drive was grueling. 2,000 head of cattle, 20 cowboys, and 600 miles to the railhead in Dodge City. Under normal circumstances, Vaughn would have lost himself in the work, in the simple rhythms of days on the trail and nights under the stars. But these weren't normal circumstances. Every mile north felt like a mile away from something vital. Every campfire tale reminded him of evenings spent reading in a small apartment above a saloon. Every sunrise made him wonder if Nora was watching the same sky. "You got it bad, don't you?" Smitty, an older cowboy, observed one night as Vaughn stared into the fire. "Got what?" Smitty chuckled. "That look a man gets when he's left his heart somewhere else. Seen it before. Hell, wore it myself once." Vaughn didn't deny it. "Doesn't matter. This is my life. The trail, moving on." "Is it?" Smitty poked the fire. "Or is that just what you're used to? There's a difference between a habit and a calling, son." The conversation haunted Vaughn through Kansas, through the cattle sale, through the payment that should have represented freedom and possibilities. On the return journey, as they approached the Arizona border, the trail boss announced they'd be stopping in Cottonwood Springs for supplies before continuing to the ranch. Vaughn felt equal parts dread and anticipation as they rode into town. The Cottonwood Saloon looked just as he remembered, except for the fresh paint and new sign hanging outside. Inside, the place was busy with the lunch crowd. Nora moved among the tables, serving plates of stew and bread, laughing with customers. She'd expanded the business, Vaughn realized. It was part saloon, part restaurant now. She saw him the moment he entered, her step faltering just slightly before she composed herself and continued her work. Vaughn removed his hat, suddenly aware of his trail-worn appearance, dusty clothes, weeks of beard, hair too long. "Well," Smitty nudged him, "you gonna stand there gawking or talk to the lady?" But before Vaughn could decide, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts, then a gunshot. Everyone in the saloon froze. "That's them. The Hammond brothers," someone yelled from the street. "They're back." The outlaws who'd attacked the saloon months ago had returned. Through the window, Vaughn could see 3 mounted men, guns drawn, terrorizing merchants on the street. "Everyone stay calm," Nora called to her patrons. "Move away from the windows." Vaughn exchanged glances with his fellow cowboys. Without a word, they checked their weapons. "Ma'am," the trail boss said to Nora, "we're happy to assist if there's trouble." "The sheriff's out of town," someone volunteered. "Won't be back till tomorrow." Outside, one of the outlaws shouted, "Valenti, we know you're in there. You and that cowboy cost us dearly. Time to settle accounts." Nora paled but stood firm. "Please," she said to the cowboys, "this isn't your fight." "It is now, ma'am," the trail boss replied, positioning men at windows. But Vaughn stepped forward. "It's me they want," he said quietly to Nora. "Me and you. They're here for revenge. Then we face them together," she replied without hesitation. Vaughn shook his head. "No, I can't risk." He stopped, the truth suddenly clear. "I can't risk losing you." Something flickered in her eyes. Hope, perhaps. "Then we need a plan," not a sacrifice. What followed was a coordinated effort. Cowboys positioned strategically, Nora's staff armed with whatever came to hand. Vaughn faced the saloon doors, ready to step outside. "Hammond," he called. "This is between you and me. Let's settle it man to man." "Come out and face us, then," came the reply. Vaughn glanced at Nora. "Trust me," he whispered. She nodded. "Always." He stepped onto the porch, hands visible but ready. The three brothers faced him from horseback, guns trained on him. "You cost us our freedom," the eldest Hammond spat. "Spent 3 months in Yuma prison because of you. You tried to burn down a lady's business," Vaughn replied evenly. "Actions have consequences. So do yours," Hammond snarled, raising his pistol. That's when the coordinated plan sprang into action. Cowboys emerged from side alleys, from rooftops, from behind water troughs, all with weapons trained on the outlaws. "Drop your guns," Vaughn commanded. "You're outnumbered." For a tense moment, it seemed the brothers might choose death over surrender. Then, slowly, the eldest lowered his weapon. "This isn't over," he growled as they were disarmed and bound. "Yes," Vaughn replied. "It is." That evening, after the outlaws were locked in the town jail awaiting the sheriff's return, the saloon hosted an impromptu celebration. The cowboys were hailed as heroes, drinks flowed freely, and music played long into the night. But Vaughn found himself on the quiet back porch with Nora, the sounds of celebration muffled by the closed door. "You're leaving again tomorrow," she said, not a question but a statement. "I have to finish the job," Vaughn replied. "See the men back to the ranch." Nora nodded, looking out at the desert night. "And then?" Vaughn took a deep breath. "And then I thought I might come back. If there's a reason to." She turned to him, moonlight silvering her honey-blonde hair. "What reason would be enough?" "You," he said simply. "If you'll have a lonesome cowboy who's finally tired of running." Her smile bloomed slowly, like a desert flower after rain. "I thought you'd never ask." "I'm asking for more than just a welcome," Vaughn said, taking her hands in his. "I'm asking if there might be a place for me here. Not just in your saloon, but in your life." "Vaughn Gray," she said, her blue eyes shining. "I've been saving a place for you since the night you stood guard over a stubborn woman who was too proud to admit she needed help." He pulled her close, his heart fuller than he'd allowed himself to feel in years. "I've been afraid for so long," he confessed. "Afraid of caring too much, of losing what I love. And now I'm more afraid of never loving at all." 2 weeks later, Vaughn returned to Cottonwood Springs, his possessions packed in saddlebags, his future uncertain but full of possibility. Nora was waiting, as promised, and the welcome in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. By Christmas of 1875, Vaughn had become a partner in the Cottonwood Saloon and Restaurant, his head for figures and knowledge of cattle country proving valuable as the business expanded. The town was growing with the promised railroad, and with it, their dreams. On Christmas Eve, beneath a star-filled Arizona sky, Vaughn knelt in the garden behind the saloon and asked Nora Valenti to be his wife. "I spent years believing the frontier only takes," he said, holding out a simple gold ring. "You showed me it gives, too, second chances, new beginnings, a heart I thought was long buried." Tears sparkled in her eyes as she answered, "Yes." They were married in spring, when the desert bloomed with wildflowers. The entire town turned out to celebrate the union of the saloon owner who'd faced down outlaws and the drifter who'd finally found his home. At the reception, old Smitty raised a toast to the lonesome cowboy who found the answer to his prayers. Vaughn held Nora close, marveling at how the universe had conspired to bring him back to life when he least expected it. "Are you happy?" Nora whispered as they swayed to the fiddle music under paper lanterns strung across the saloon. Vaughn looked down at his bride, at the home they'd built together, at the future stretching out before them. No longer a barren trail, but a garden of possibilities. "For the first time in my life," he answered truthfully, "I'm not afraid of tomorrow." And as the music played and their friends celebrated around them, Vaughn Gray finally understood that the frontier wasn't just about survival. It was about finding the courage to build something lasting in a world of impermanence, whether a town, a business, or a love strong enough to heal the wounds of the past.